Hi, this is Cara, and today I will be reflecting on the English for Secondary Teachers audit and discuss how we understand and teach grammar and cohesive devices. I've used a coastal line as the branding for my presentation. A rip occurs in the water when two currents meet, creating a vacuum that will pull you out to sea. If you were to get caught in a rip, you might start to fight against the current and eventually tire. However, by remaining calm, the water will eventually carry you to a place where you can swim away from the rip safely and back to shore. The rip will never pull you under. Learning or relearning anything can be a difficult and laborious task. It can be easy to start to panic and get frustrated with the process, but through incorporating metacognitive techniques into our teaching, we can allow our students to learn and revisit learning in order to retain any information. I consciously decided to not call the slides where I discuss my performance in the audit strengths or weaknesses. This particular slide are the areas I scored the highest marks. I hope my dual coding reflects that rather than calling these higher marks my strengths, they're a reflection of what may have come naturally to me or where I was able to successfully build on my own prior knowledge. My reluctancy to call them strengths is because I found the entire audit very challenging. Whilst I was able to identify some correct answers, I found I was able to successfully break down the question and through a process of elimination make educated assumptions, or by seeking assistance from the glossary, I was able to correctly identify the answer. The areas I scored highest on and required no additional assistance were with the written and spoken English, response to fiction and non-fiction, presentation of information and ideas, and critical approaches. The areas I needed to break down the questions further or seek additional assistance with was with the technical terms and word function sections. The benefit of researching the definitions, especially with Section A technical terms, meant it gave me the confidence I think I would have lacked had I first attempted it without, because I would have felt out of my depth. These were the areas I scored particularly low in or achieved a 0. Again, rather than identify with these areas as weaknesses, I wanted to look at them as my key areas of improvement. Despite struggling, I was happy to discover that I was retaining information and could apply it to questions further into the audit, and whilst the audit progressed, my confidence did overall. Having been out of education for the last 7 years, I particularly struggled to understand the academic lexis used throughout the questions. I think I was struggling to understand the formal tone the questions are approached in rather than the task itself. I found this reflection interesting because the Magenta Principles recommends reducing information to maximise learning, and I personally felt the lexis used sometimes was unnecessarily formal and hard to follow. The areas I scored the lowest in were pre- and post-19th century poetry and drama, phonemic and syllabic segmentation, which was interesting as I thought I would find this easy and felt very confident in my performance during this task, and finally grammar, in particular cohesion, which is what I shall focus my presentation on today. So what is cohesion? Halliday and Hanson, two Australian linguistic professors, have carried out groundbreaking analysis in text structure and its coherence. They describe cohesion as a semantic relation between an element of the text and some other element that is crucial to the interpretation of it. Cohesion connects written or spoken language together. It allows for the reader or audience to make safe assumptions based on what they've already heard. It makes text engaging and exciting to read, adds sophistication with broader vocabulary, it does what it says on the tin, it creates coherence within text. Cohesion is really interesting as we can assess its functions and benefits across literature, language, speaking and listening, the exploration of grammar and vocabulary, and creative writing. There are 4 main areas of cohesion: reference, substitution, ellipsis and conjunction. Jeff Barton discusses the importance of grammatical cohesion, and though many people probably haven't been taught about it explicitly, it's the term to describe various ways of linking sentences and paragraphs together. Whilst putting my examples together in a clear and simple way, I found there were many avenues of grammar cohesion allows us to explore and analyse that would be appropriate for all ability learners. For reference, we have the introduction of pronouns and other word classes, and it provides us with a fluidity that the original sentence lacked. Substitution offers a more sophisticated development of vocabulary through the use of synonyms. By eliminating words from the text, ellipsis introduces concepts such as the effects of punctuation, as there is no implication of what is unsaid that is not understood. It can often be a key indicator of spoken language features and dialects. Finally, conjunction. This is distinguished through the connection of clauses, for example, a subordinate clause to an indefinite clause, as well as an introduction to the passive voice. Looking at the examples of cohesion I put together, it may seem like a particularly simple concept to grasp. Whilst trying to pinpoint and understand the various definitions, I felt I needed to get into the headspace of a student. If I'm struggling to grasp this concept as an adult, how am I expected to teach it to 16-year-olds and younger, who are all at varying abilities of learning? Understanding grammar, in particular cohesion, is complicated because we use it all the time. How are we supposed to teach grammatical devices that we already use, but we don't know why we're using them or how? This is a concept that Halliday and Hansen explore. Cohesive devices are particularly difficult to identify because they are hard to distinguish and they achieve similar effects on text. In order to get into the mindset of my students, I felt I needed to explore how students would revise these grammatical terms away from school. I bought multiple revision guides and study books from CGP to understand the definitions that students would be expected to use in exams. I found it really helpful in giving me clear examples for features such as text and sentence structure, recognising word types, and how to vary our writing in both English literature and language across Key Stage 3 and 4. To get back into the mindset of the teacher, I extensively explored the Key Stage 3 and 4 curriculum to ascertain precisely the definitions of these grammatical features. I came across the glossary for the programmes of study for English, which provided a very clear and simple definition for all technical terms across grammar and vocabulary. My dual coding here is to reflect me passing you the key to working smarter and not harder. There are many terms covered in this glossary, and I think many teachers would benefit from accessing this concise piece of information. So how do we take the cohesion umbrella and filter it into other areas of grammar that we can clearly break down to teach to all abilities in Key Stage 3 and 4? Post-research, I found myself down a cohesion rabbit hole. There are many areas of grammar that cohesion ties into, as demonstrated in the Venn diagram on the screen. The Key Stage 3 English curriculum states students should understand and use age-appropriate vocabulary, including linguistic and literary terminology, for discussing their reading, writing and spoken language. Ellipsis takes the form of removing words, which leads into the effect of punctuation in written or spoken language. It's essential we teach the correct use of punctuation to our Key Stage 3 learners, similar to the basics such as being able to spell correctly. We need our learners to create complete coherence for their audience or reader. Cohesive reference functions introduce learners to different word classes and develop their vocabulary, as well as understanding the fundamentals of sentence structure. This ties nicely into the use of written and spoken standard English in our classrooms. As the curriculum states, students should be able to draw on new vocabulary and grammatical constructions from their reading and listening, and use these consciously in their writing and speech to achieve particular effects. So what constitutes a good learning environment and how do we share knowledge? Grammar is an overwhelmingly broad topic ranging across simple to highly complex rule groups. We must avoid confusion and cognitive overload in the classroom. We already know that the average attention span of a child is only 15 minutes. Rosenshine's second principle states we must present only a small amount of new material at any time, and then assist the students as they practice this material. Only after the students have mastered the first step do teachers proceed to the next step. There are many ways we can assess that learning is taking place in the classroom outside of summative assessment. We can encourage low and high order thinking techniques to ensure our students retain information in their long-term memory. This can be achieved through quizzes, discussion, comparisons and evaluation, to name a few. Grammar is best digested alongside other areas of work, highlighting grammatical features whilst working through a text in literature or language as part of a lesson activity, and modelling the success criteria or providing scaffolding support is a great way to incorporate grammar into our lessons whilst avoiding cognitive overload. So now learning has taken place, how do we make sure this becomes part of our educational DNA? How do we retain the information and make it long-term memory? Forgetting is by no means a failure. However, the more ways we can present the same information to students means they're more likely to commit it to long-term memory. Jeff Barton discusses in the Grammar Survival Guide Teacher's Toolkit, as teachers we need to be aware of what we can do to develop pupils' vocabulary. Many of them will come to us with impoverished lexis, and if we know that certain words characterise higher level writing, let's tell pupils and teach those words more explicitly, meaning we need to make it easy to achieve success in the classroom. Retrieval practice is a delay between the learning taking place and how we access the information to retrieve it. This can be done through engager tasks, such as recap questions or write your own question based on the last lesson. Space practice is achieved after taking a break from a learning activity and then coming back to the same content after a period of time. Feedback-driven metacognition is essential in giving students an accurate judgment of their own work. We can self-mark, peer mark, or live mark throughout lessons to ensure everyone is working at the same level. Dual coding offers the same information in different formats. This could be done through visual or sound aids. We must constantly strive to create desirable difficulties, as challenging our students allows them to build stronger cranial pathways to the brain. There are many ways we can incorporate grammar into our lesson plans. On the progress arrow on the screen, I've included some ideas for class grammar activities that can be incorporated into our lesson plans from Magenta, Teach It, and the Grammar Survival Guide. They increase with difficulty as they progress along the arrow, but can be adapted to all age and ability groups. Whilst creating activities, we need to be asking questions like, is there enough challenge or scaffold included? Is this encouraging active learning and not passive learning? The Magenta sandwich technique is achieved through starting a lesson with a question and ending the lesson with the same question. This will give a clear indication of progress and incorporates retrieval practice. Turn a block of text into a tweet limits students using only 140 characters, another Magenta principle. Add a challenger for desirable difficulties by reducing the text using only cohesive devices. The Magenta dice, where each side of the dice has different grammatical features pupils must look for. This can be rolled whilst reading any text, and by allowing the students to roll the dice themselves, they can start to take on the role of the teacher. I'll discuss a few more in detail. We all have different pathways of learning, and low ability does not mean not able. There are many factors that can contribute to differentiation and students needing additional support. As teachers, we need to ascertain how students access information and retain it differently. The teacher's attitude sets the tone of the entire lesson. We must create intrinsic motivation in the classroom whilst having high expectations with realistic targets that stretch our students and create desirable difficulties throughout our lesson plans. There are many methods that incorporate various degrees of difficulty whilst keeping the tasks inclusive for the entire class. Techniques include the chili method from mild hot to inferno, the 3-column method of learning. With each activity, the students can progress to the next stage depending on the level of challenge they require. Topping and tailing is achieved through choosing a level of work you would expect the majority of the class to know and create levels of activity that are above and below, offering challenge to all ability learners. Working to the top is the process of tailoring your activity of learning to the top set ability in the class and working backwards so you would incorporate lower levels of learning into the same task. Here is an extract from Jeff Barton's Grammar Survival Guide. I particularly like this section of the book as it covers so many areas of learning that we can incorporate into our teaching, from the task itself to further activities to class displays. We clearly understand the outcomes of the activity is to understand what connectives are and how we use them in sentences and how we can achieve success in this task. This is only an engager activity, so it doesn't need to be highly complex, as we only want to gauge students' prior knowledge on the subject in hand. We can add levels of challenge through desirable difficulties, first giving students sentences and connectives to put together, and then progress them to find their own sentences and connectives in pairs. Moving on to another activity that I found on Teach It, with very clear instructions on how to play personal pronoun snap. The concept of this game is great as it can be adapted to work with almost any grammatical feature. However, it is important to bear in mind the interference levels it may impose if the students were to make cards themselves as part of the activity. But one of the great features of having physical cards in activities mean they can be used again and become part of dual coding, and they can be incorporated into space and retrieval practice, as well as interleaving through asking students to use the nominated grammatical feature on the cards in a piece of writing, for example. The activity is fast-paced with low stakes, and levels of challenge can be added through by making your own examples to match the pronoun. Instruction number 5 states whichever student has the most cards is the winner, but I would personally leave this out for differentiation purposes so students can encourage their peers and provide support to less confident learners. Thank you for listening to my presentation today, and I look forward to any questions.